What if the thing waiting for you at home wasn't your cat anymore? The rain was coming down in sheets as Marvin pulled into his driveway. It had been a grueling 2-week business trip, the kind of exhausting corporate grind that used to push him right back to the bottom of a bourbon bottle, but not anymore. He was 3 years sober. He had fought through hell to reclaim his life, and his anchor through it all was his family. His loving wife, Julie.
Marvin killed the engine, took a deep breath, and smiled. He was home. He grabbed his bags and hurried through the pouring rain, eager for the familiar comforts of his living room, the smell of Julie's cooking, and the soft purr of Raja, their chunky orange tabby cat. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Hello? I'm home," he called out, shaking the water from his coat. "Daddy!" Little Ike came running down the hallway, throwing his arms around Marvin's legs.
Julie was right behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up with a warm, welcoming smile. "We missed you so much," Julie said, pulling him into a kiss. "I missed you guys too," Marvin said, breathing in the scent of his home. But something caught in his throat. Underneath the smell of roasted garlic from the kitchen, there was a faint, sickening odor. It smelled like copper, damp earth, and spoiled meat.
"Look who else missed you," Julie beamed, pointing toward the corner of the living room. Marvin followed her gaze, fully expecting to see their little orange tabby curled up on his favorite armchair. Instead, the breath was violently punched from his lungs. Sitting on the rug was a creature straight out of a fever nightmare. It was a humanoid figure, roughly 5 feet tall, crouching awkwardly on all fours. Its limbs were too long, folding at unnatural, sharp angles.
It was wearing a crude, horrific disguise, a cheap, oversized mask shaped like a cartoonish cat, painted with crusty orange and black stripes. But the fur wasn't fur. It looked like human skin, painted over with thick, dried acrylics. Through the jagged eye holes of the mask, Marvin saw 2 very real, very human eyes staring back at him. Dead, unblinking eyes. Marvin dropped his bags. They hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud.
The creature shifted its weight, its joints popping with sickening cracks, and let out a sound that froze the blood in Marvin's veins. It was a wet, gargling noise, a man's vocal cords desperately trying to mimic the high-pitched meow of a house cat. "Good boy, Raja," Ike giggled, walking over and absent-mindedly petting the monstrous thing on its painted, lumpy head. Marvin's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt dizzy. "Julie," he choked out, his voice trembling.
"Julie, get Ike away from that thing, right now." Julie looked at him, her smile faltering, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "What are you talking about, Marv? It's just Raja. He's begging for treats." "That is not our cat," Marvin screamed, panic finally shattering his composure. He lunged forward, grabbing Ike by the collar and yanking him behind him. He reached for the nearest weapon, a heavy brass fire poker from the hearth. The creature recoiled, hissing.
But it wasn't a cat's hiss. It sounded like air escaping a slashed tire. "Marvin, stop it! You're scaring him!" Julie shrieked, throwing herself between Marvin and the monstrosity. "Look at it, Julie! Open your eyes! It's a man in a mask! It's a monster!" But Julie wasn't looking at the creature. She was staring at Marvin with a look of absolute, heartbreaking terror. "Oh, God," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You're using again, aren't you? The pills, the alcohol." "No, I'm completely sober." But it was too late. The panic in his eyes, the wild swinging of the fire poker, the screaming, it perfectly mirrored his worst days of addiction. Within 20 minutes, the police were there. Given Marvin's documented history of substance abuse and psychiatric breaks, his desperate screams about a giant painted monster only sealed his fate. He was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. For 30 agonizing days in the psych ward, Marvin lived in a state of sheer, suffocating dread. Every night, he stared at the ceiling, visualizing that 5-foot-tall horror roaming the halls of his home, sleeping at the foot of his son's bed. But Marvin was smart. He realized quickly that screaming the truth would only keep him locked up forever. So he played the game. He attended the group sessions,
He admitted to a stress-induced relapse. He swallowed their pills. He smiled. He nodded. He faked his recovery perfectly. And finally, they let him go. When Marvin returned home, the house was chillingly quiet. Julie and Ike were thrilled to have him back, acting as if the ugly incident was just a bump in the road to his recovery. And there, sitting on the sofa, was the creature. It looked at Marvin, and though the painted mask couldn't move, Marvin swore he could see a smug, mocking glint in those disturbingly human eyes.
The parasite knew Marvin couldn't say a word. It knew it had won. But Marvin had a plan. If he couldn't expose the monster, he would just have to kill it quietly. That evening, Marvin volunteered to cook dinner, while Julie and Ike were distracted in the living room, watching TV while that thing perched unnaturally beside them. Marvin crushed several heavy-duty sleeping pills into their portions of spaghetti. By 9 p.m., his wife and son were deeply, irreversibly asleep in their beds. The house was dead silent. Marvin went to the garage and retrieved a razor-sharp hunting knife. He gripped the handle tightly, his knuckles turning white, and walked back into the living room. The creature was still there, sitting in the dark. It didn't try to run. It didn't try to fight. It simply tilted its oversized, grotesque head as Marvin approached. "You picked the wrong house," Marvin whispered, his voice shaking with pure hatred. He lunged.
He pinned the heavy, bony creature to the carpet, straddling its chest. The creature didn't struggle. It just let out a low, vibrating hum. Marvin dug his fingers under the thick, painted edge of the creature's neck, right where the mask met its real flesh, and drove the blade in. He sliced upward, tearing the faux skin open. Thick, blackish blood began to ooze from the wound. But suddenly, the silence of the house was shattered by a piercing, blood-curdling scream from upstairs. Ike.
Marvin dropped the knife and sprinted up the stairs, his heart leaping into his throat. He burst into his son's bedroom. Ike was thrashing violently in his sleep, crying out in agony, his hands clutching his throat. Marvin rushed to the bedside and pulled his son's hands away. He gasped, falling backward onto the floor. Right there, on little Ike's neck, a deep, jagged laceration had magically appeared.
It was the exact same length in the exact same spot where Marvin had just cut the monster downstairs. Bright red blood was soaking into Ike's pajama collar. The horrifying truth crashed down on Marvin like a physical weight. The parasite hadn't just invaded his home. It had woven itself into the biological fabric of his family. It had tied its life force to theirs. If Marvin killed the creature, he would kill his own wife and son.
Defeated, broken, and trapped in an invisible prison, Marvin patched up his son's neck, crying silently in the dark. Weeks bled into months. Marvin lived like a ghost in his own home. He watched his wife feed the monster bowls of raw meat. He watched his son play fetch with it. He bit his tongue until it bled, trapped in a waking nightmare. Desperation finally pushed him to make one last gamble. He called his younger brother, Dan.
Dan lived 3 towns over and was the most pragmatic, no-nonsense guy Marvin knew. If anyone could help him figure out a way to break this parasitic bond, it was Dan. "Just come over," Marvin begged on the phone. "I need you to see something. And please, just trust me." When Dan arrived that Saturday afternoon, Marvin met him at the door. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside and pointed into the living room. Dan walked in, a 6-pack of beer in his hand. He took one look at the 5-foot-tall, painted abomination sitting on the rug. Dan froze. The color instantly drained from his face. The 6-pack slipped from his grip, the glass bottles shattering against the floor. "Marv," Dan whispered, his voice trembling with primal fear. What the hell is that thing?" A wave of overwhelming relief washed over Marvin. He sees it. He wasn't crazy. The illusion didn't work on outsiders. "I know, Dan, I know!" Marvin cried, stepping forward. "It's some kind of parasite. It's manipulating Julie and Ike, and if I hurt it, they get hurt. We have to figure out how to—" "Dan?" Marvin stopped. He looked at his brother. The terrified, wide-eyed expression on Dan's face was melting away. His posture relaxed, his shoulders dropped. A strange, low-frequency hum suddenly filled the room, the same hum the creature had made the night Marvin attacked it. Dan blinked slowly.
When his eyes opened again, the fear was gone. They were completely vacant, glazed over with a dopey, placid warmth. "Dan?" Marvin asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dan stepped right over the broken glass, walking toward the creature. He reached out a hand and began to scratch the monster behind its crude, painted ears. "Aw," Dan chuckled softly. "Look at you. Raja, buddy, you've gotten so big since the last time I saw you." Marvin backed away. He backed out of the living room into the hallway and pressed his back against the front door, sliding down until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest, trembling uncontrollably as he listened to his brother baby talk the monstrosity in the next room. Slowly, Marvin turned his head and looked out the narrow window next to the front door. The sun was setting over their quiet suburban street. He watched his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, walking down the sidewalk. She was holding a leash, but at the end of the leash wasn't her golden retriever. It was a massive, hulking shape, shuffling on all fours in the twilight, its skin painted in crude, matted gold. Across the street, the mailman was cheerfully tossing a frisbee to an 8-foot-tall, spindly nightmare painted like a Dalmatian. They were everywhere. Marvin squeezed his eyes shut as a single tear rolled down his cheek.
He realized with absolute, crushing certainty that the invasion hadn't just happened to his house. The whole town already belonged to them. Would you be able to live like Marvin? Comment your theory below and subscribe for more true horror.